Hi, my name is Brittany Leland, and I am from Texas Career Engagement. I'm going to be walking you through some resume basics today. To start, it's important to remember what a resume is used for and why it's important. Resumes are for a job candidate to tell their story to the employer. Resumes are used in order to obtain an interview, and it's during the interview when you will actually obtain a job. So it's really important that when we think about framing our resume, we think about the most important parts of what we've done and the qualifications and skills that we bring to the table, and that we highlight those in this document. A resume is not ever going to be everything that you've ever done in every job or role that you have ever had, but it's going to be an intentional collection of the most important and relevant experiences that you have that will entice an employer or potential employer to want to talk to you more in an interview and learn more about you. So what kind of content can you put on your resume? Really, there are an infinite number of sections that you can include on your resume. It's really just dependent on what your experience is and what the role itself is looking for. However, there are some basic ones that we tend to see on most documents. And here is a list of some of those that are good options. Obviously, every single resume will always have contact information. That is an essential required resume rule, so make sure that that's included. But beyond that, what you list on your resume, again, is very much dependent on what your experience is and what they're looking for. If you're a student at UT, you're going to have an education section where you list out your degree, the degree that you're currently working on. But then everything else on here is really, really optional. If you have a lot of volunteering experience, but you don't have any work experience, then you'll leave work experience off and you'll create a volunteering section. Or if you have a lot of leadership experience and a lot of experience in organizations, then that might be a section that you include. But if you don't have any experience in student organizations, you wouldn't have to include that as a section. So really think of this list as suggestions, but certainly not requirements. Here are just some general resume guidelines. Obviously, you want your resume to be readable and to look clean and sharp to the reader. So we want to stay away from font that gets too big or too small. Generally, it's going to be between 11 and 12 point. Depending on the font style you choose, you may be able to go as small as 10 point, but it really depends on what kind of spacing you have on the page. You don't want it to look too crowded. You don't want it to just be a jumble of words. So be intentional with that. Something that you can do to help balance out your page better is to play around with your margins a little bit. Typically, they're going to be 1 inch, and that's what most document programs are going to default to. However, if you need to make them a little bit smaller, you can potentially go out to as small as 1/2 of an inch. But again, making sure that it doesn't just look like the page is really crowded. Then you want to make sure you're still balancing where the content is hitting and balancing white space with text. On your resume, your order does matter. And so you always want to make sure that within each of your sections, those headers that we were just looking at that last slide, that everything listed in those sections is in reverse chronological order, meaning that the most recent experience is listed first, and then it goes backward in time from there. And also within the sections themselves, you can pick which section comes first on your resume based on which ones are your strongest for that position. So let's say you have some work experience and some leadership experience, but your leadership experience is really strong and it's really relevant to the role you're applying for. You may choose to list leadership as a section before you list your work experience section. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this today. You do want to make sure your formatting is consistent. Again, at first glance, when it's just someone's very quickly scanning your document with their eye, you want it to look nice. And so you want to make sure that if you're using a specific style for, let's say, your organization names, you do that consistently throughout all of your sections. Or if you're putting some of your dates on the right-hand side of the page, that you're putting all of your dates on the right-hand side of the page. So it does need to be consistent. You also want to avoid using complete sentences. You don't want to use personal pronouns. You'll be using bullet points. And each of those bullet points is going to start with a verb, and it's going to talk about what you were responsible for, how you met that responsibility, and what the outcome was. And we'll go into greater depth in just a moment. And then another important tip to remember is to submit your resume as a PDF in order to maintain your formatting. It is really easy for a document to start to get shifted around if it's not in PDF format. So to be safe, always submit as a PDF. All right, so what kinds of things go on your resume? And this is really where you get a chance to reflect back on the things that you've done. You get a chance to really look closely at the types of positions you're applying for. And you're going to use both of those sets of information to determine what is going to be on this document. A lot of times transferable skills are something that come up as important, and transferable skills are simply skills that you've developed or shown that you possess in one situation that could also be used in another situation, right? So if you think about things like good communication skills, good leadership, good time management, those are all things that maybe you've developed in a certain setting that you could take to another setting that would be helpful as well. So we're going to dive into each section now and go into a little bit greater depth here, starting with that contact information. Like I said, every single person who has a resume should have a contact information section. It should be at the top of your document, and it should be really clear and easy to find. Your name will be listed. It will be the largest font on the page. Here, it is important to note that if you go by a different name, it's important to list that on your resume. You can list your legal name and then put your preferred name in parentheses if you'd like, or if you really do not go by another name, you only go by your preferred name, feel free to just list that as well. Keep in mind that if you're filling out an actual application, it may ask for a legal name and you will need to put your legal name there. But for the resume, you are welcome to put your preferred name here to make it a little bit easier for the employer when they reach out to you so that they know what to call you and how to address you. This is also a section where if you'd like to list pronouns, you are welcome to do that as well. That can be another helpful thing for both you and the employer. As far as contact information, you always want to make sure you have your phone number and your email address. Your email address does need to be a professional email address and one that you check frequently. So if you check your UT email address a lot, that is great to list. But if you never look at that, then don't list that for employers, because if that's what you list, that's what they're going to use. So pick one that you check frequently. And then some other optional things you can include in here would be your physical address. And by that, I mean, you can put your your street address if you would like, but we're actually seeing a bit of a movement away from that right now. It's just unnecessary for an employer to know exactly where you live because they're probably not actually sending you physical mail, not email. But it can be helpful to list your city, state, and zip code if you are a local candidate and you want to indicate to the employer that you are already located where they are, or you are planning to return to where they're located. So let's say that you are from Houston and you've been up here in Austin for your school, but your plan is to go back to Houston for an upcoming internship or a job that you're applying for. You may want to indicate on your contact information that you're from Houston so that they know that you're going to be in the area anyways, because if they look at your resume, they may see all of your experience as Austin and assume that you're an Austin candidate, which may or may not be a big deal, but it can be helpful to list the local address. However, if you're applying for somewhere where you are not currently located, that is totally fine too. That should not at all be a reason not to apply, but it might be a reason not to list your physical or your current city, state, zip address. All right, education is another really important section. And as a student at UT, you will have this section as well. As a student who's coming out of their undergraduate program or currently in their undergraduate program, we generally recommend that education should be the first section listed after your contact information because it is really relevant to employers for them to see when you are graduating and what you've been studying. However, once you get out of UT and you've been out for a few years, you may see that section start to fall or drop a little bit lower on your resume. Within your education section, you will list UT, and you will make sure that you list it as University of Texas at Austin. And then you're going to list your degree that you're trying to get. So a bachelor of whatever your degree is. And then you'll list out your major, minor, certificates, anything else that's relevant. For education, if you attended a college or university where you did not obtain a degree, but you obtained some credits, then you will list the dates as a date range. So the month and year you started to the month and year you ended. If you are attending an institution with the intent of getting a degree, or you have received your degree already, then you only need to list your month and year of graduation. So you'll notice here on my examples that both of them just list the month and year of graduation. They do not list a date range. That is the correct way to do it. You should be fine just to list it that way. I also want to point out the GPA piece, because that's a question we get a lot. When should I list my GPA? When shouldn't I? There are certainly some industries where you're going to need to list your GPA no matter what. And if a job posting requests a specific GPA, and you'll see this most often for internships, then you probably will need to list your GPA. However, if the posting doesn't request it and you don't want to list your GPA, you generally don't have to. Now, we tend to say that if you've got a higher GPA, go ahead and list it anyways. And it's up to you to determine what feels comfortable for you to list, but our general rule of thumb is a 3.3 or a 3.5 and above rate to list. If you have lower than that and you want to list it, it is your document and that is your choice. However, I would just keep in mind that if they're not asking for that GPA and it's a little bit lower, you may not need to volunteer that information right off the bat. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can sometimes do a major GPA instead of a cumulative GPA if you feel like your classes in your major are going to be higher. And that is generally fine to do as well, but make sure that you mark that it is a major GPA, that you indicate that on your resume so that they don't assume that that's your cumulative GPA, especially if they end up asking for your transcripts, either at the initial application point or later on down the road, because we want to make sure that they recognize you were portraying your candidacy as honestly as possible. All right, work experience is another section. And honestly, this slide is labeled work experience, but what I'm about to say could apply to a lot of the sections, including volunteer, including leadership, including involvement, including relevant work experience or other work experience. But what's important to think about here is how you list out your experiences. And like I mentioned at the beginning, everything is going to be reverse chronological order. So you're going to start with the most recent or current experience, and then you'll go backwards as you go down the page. You also want to make sure that you're listing out the organization name, your position title, and then you're using those bullets to describe what you did, what you learned, the skills that you have from that experience. So here's a simple little way of thinking about your bullets. Each bullet is going to start with an action verb, and it's going to include a project or accomplishment, and then it's going to talk about your outcome or your purpose. So another way to think about this is, what did you do? How did you do it? And what was the reason for or outcome of what you did? This formula is really helpful when you are doing resume reviews or you're reviewing your own resume, is looking at each bullet and asking, do I answer the question, what did I do? Did I answer the question, how I did it? And did I answer the question of why did I do it, or what was the outcome? So let's take a second to think through what that might look like. All right, so let's look at an example. Maybe I had an internship where I had to design a new social media campaign using Adobe Photoshop and InDesign. And that led to a 15% increase in social media followers over a 2-month period. So you can see how this example uses this formula of what did you do, how did you do it, and what was the reason for or outcome of what you did. What I did is I designed a new social media campaign. How I did it was I used Adobe Photoshop and InDesign. And it's really important that I use that specific language because those are probably key words that are important for an employer to see on my document. And then my result, what happened? Why did I do it? What was the outcome? Was it led to a 15% increase in social media followers over a 2-month period. And the great thing about this example is that I use numbers twice. The more that you can quantify your impact, the better evidence is that you actually are able to demonstrate the skills that you're claiming to have. So I said 15% and I said 2-month period. So it's a really clear, tangible example of how I had an impact at a previous organization or employer. So we're not actually going to pause for an activity right now because this is a recording and that would be a little bit boring. But if you'd like, you're welcome to pause the video and think a little bit about how you might be able to use this formula of what did you do? What did it look like when you did it? And why did you do it? Or what was the outcome? To take a look at some of the bullets on your own resume or on a friend's resume, just to get in the habit of checking for those 3 things. The more you can follow that formula, the better off your resume is going to be and the stronger your bullets will be. I very briefly want to cover other sections that you may choose to include. So if you have a lot of experience working with community organizations, volunteering, co-curricular experiences, you may list those out in sections that look identical to the way we talked about formatting your work experience earlier on. However, if you want to include these sections, but maybe they're less important and you don't have quite as much room, you may want to list it out towards the bottom of your document. And if that's the case, your formatting doesn't have to be exactly the same way that it was earlier on the page. Now, you don't want to go into a totally different direction, but you still want it to make it visually flow. However, on this, you'll notice that the position title and the organization name and the dates are all together. There's one bullet under each experience instead of multiple bullets. So that is an option if you need to. And I want to take a second to remind folks that in general, your resume, especially at this point in your career, probably needs to be at about 1 page. Some industries will allow you to go more than 1. Some employers will be okay with 2, but for the most part, to be the safest, probably best to go with 1. Now, keep in mind that all of this advice today in this video is general advice. So as you get more experience within your specific field, as you get advice from folks who specialize in your area of study or employment, they may have more or different advice on how to structure some of these things. And that's great. Go with what they're saying. If they're the experts in where you're trying to focus, go with that. But these are some of the general tips that we tend to hear from recruiters who are recruiting a variety of majors or backgrounds. All right, and then honors is another section you may choose to include if you've got space and you've got some things that you want to include in here. Important to remember to include dates when you list out your honors or awards. And also, if you can, if you're listing an award that's important, that was competitive, but that may not be recognizable to most readers, you may want to do a quick 1 bullet or even few word description of what that award is so that the reader knows how important or impactful it was that you received that. And then finally, the skills section is another optional section we see on a lot of resumes. Our general advice is to make sure that when you are listing out skills in a skills section, that you are listing out what we consider to be hard skills, which are skills that are demonstratable, that are measurable. One way I like to think about it is if it's a skill that you could demonstrate in an interview on demand, then that would probably be something to put in a skills section. So for example, if I indicate that I can speak Spanish on my resume in my skills section, in an interview, they could say, speak Spanish, and I either could or could not, right? If I say that I'm proficient in Excel, they could put a laptop in front of me and say, create a pivot table on Excel or do these tasks within Excel, and I either could or could not do them, right? The skills that are going to be less helpful to list here in this section will be what some folks call soft skills, skills that are a little bit more of the transferable skills, maybe harder to quantify or measure. So things like communication, leadership, teamwork, critical thinking, right? If I'm sitting in an interview and someone says, show me critical thinking, I can't just critical think unless they give me maybe a situation to play it out a little bit or a case study to walk through, but I can't just demonstrate critical thinking on the spot. And that's one way to think about what should go in here. Now, those other skills, those soft skills are incredibly important to have on your resume. The difference is they'll be much more impactful if you can integrate that language into the bullets up above, underneath the experiences where you demonstrated those soft skills. So if you say that you're good at critical thinking, think about which experiences on your resume required you to use critical thinking, and then create a bullet that demonstrates what that critical thinking experience looked like under that particular organization or position. All right, those are just some very general resume tips for individuals who might be looking to get started on their document, or for individuals who might be looking to help provide some guidance or support to their peers in creating their resumes or refining their resumes. But for more information or for more specific advice on your resume that pertains to your particular major or area of focus, strongly recommend that you reach out to your school's career center. Or that you reach out to Texas Career Engagement. We are happy to provide assistance. Our office also helps with choosing a major or career. We offer career assessments, practice interviews, job and internship search planning, and much more. So for more information, please go to careerengagement.utexas.edu, or to schedule an appointment, go to hire.utexas.edu. Thank you and good luck.